Hello and welcome to The Telescope. Every week we bring you a fresh insight from the biggest car market in the world. Now we've brought you the review of the BYD Seagull 2 weeks ago. At that time I said that car has no competition. Well, now here we are. This is its arch rival in China. It's called the Wuling Bingo. If you watched an earlier video on The Telescope called Cheap is Good, Make Small EVs Great Again, then you would have already known some details about this car. Now is this car's bigger battery, 410 kilometer CLTC range, and with top speed lifted to 130 kph. This now is spec for spec a head-on rival for the BYD Seagull, and we will see how it gets on. Exterior design wise, if the BYD Seagull is aggressively cute, then this I will say is elegant and, dare I say, a bit classic, especially at the rear. The best way I can describe this car's exterior design is it's a Mini without trying to be sporty. At 3.98 meters long, this is over 20 centimeters longer than the Seagull and over 6 centimeters longer in wheelbase. And it does show in the interior space. This Bingo has more space on the back row, and more importantly, that boot. The boot in terms of length and width is normal, I would say, but the depth is quite extraordinary. This is a much nicer interior than the BYD Seagull. You can clearly see from this very classic center console, these 3 dials in the center are not just beautiful to look at, they are very nicely weighted as well. And on the steering wheel and here at the window control area, this is much more exquisite than other cars in this class. You can clearly see in this car's cost structure, they're trying to make a more upmarket interior. This is where the money has been spent. Things they can improve on: this steering wheel. It looks very nice, it works fine, but it's only two-way adjustable. I've said many times, especially on a small car like this, four-way adjustable steering wheel can give you a better seating position overall. It's not just about how you hold your wheel. And this car does not have a rear wiper. I think it's a bigger problem on this longer range, more top speed spec, because now this car is expected to be used on the highway a lot, and when it's raining, a rear wiper is one of the most cost-effective way to improve safety. On the infotainment, this is slightly inferior to the BYD Seagull. It has a dual screen layout. It looks very upmarket. It has all the functions you need, navigation, music, etc. But it does not have the universal compatibility that a BYD system provides. On the BYD system, you can install just about any Android apps on it and it runs as normal because that screen rotates. When it's in its portrait orientation, all of the apps on your phone runs as normal on that infotainment system, and that's quite a significant advantage. Here in the back, it's significantly bigger than the Seagull, but I would argue not any more comfortable because the seats are very close to the floor. You're kind of sitting on the floor a little bit, and this seat back angle, I think, looking at it, is definitely more upright than the Seagull. I would say this back row is more comfortable if you sit on it for shorter distance, but if you want to travel for long distance, I prefer the Seagull's back row, even though it's a bit smaller than this. We're on the move with the Wuling Bingo. On performance, this car does have a, I think, quite significant disadvantage on paper. This has a motor that only has 50 kilowatts, that's 68 horsepower. Compared to the 75 horsepower motor on the Seagull, it's 7 horsepower less. Now you might think that's a very small margin, but the acceleration of the Seagull above 100 kph is already, I wouldn't say marginal, but it's quite slow, you know. Take 7 horsepower away from it, I'm quite worried about this car's high speed acceleration. Now we're on the highway, we're currently doing 80 kph. I'm gonna floor it to see just how slow this car is at high speed, okay? 3, 2, 1, go. That's 85, 90, 95, 100, 107, 110, 115, 120. It's still accelerating. That's 130. Oh, I've only just driven the BYD Seagull about 10 days ago, and I can't really tell the difference between these two cars above 100 kph. They are both very slow, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this car is fast. It takes a long time for this car to get to 130, but this car doesn't feel significantly slower than the BYD Seagull, despite having 7 horsepower less. I suppose we need to compare it back to back. Steering in this car is very light, but this is a very small and light car. I would argue it's slightly too light, to the point that if you are driving this car for the very first time and when you turn the steering wheel for the very first time, it's too light to the point that you wouldn't even take it very seriously. You wouldn't think this is a full-blown car. It's that light. I thought the steering weight is adjustable in the infotainment, but I checked, it isn't. In future model year, I suggest Wuling to add the steering weight just a teeny tiny bit, but I still prefer this current steering to the BYD Seagull. It's not trying to be a bigger, heavier car. It feels very agile, and so it should be. Chassis setting, this feels stiffer than the Seagull, and I think it's a good thing. The Seagull feels too soft, especially at high speed. Let's say you need to switch out of this highway within 1 kilometer, you need to make 2 or 3 consecutive lane changes. This car gives you more confidence. There's significantly less body roll in this compared to the Seagull. In general, you have more confidence in this car at high speed, even though it's incrementally a bit slower than the Seagull on the highway. This car is bigger, has more space without losing any of the agility. On the design, this is definitely more elegant and classier, both on the exterior and especially on the interior compared to the Seagull. We're filming this about 5 days before the actual launch, but we are hearing from the manufacturer that this car will be priced very similar to the 400-kilometer range version of the BYD Seagulls. And it's definitely a better buy than the 333-kilometer range version of this Wuling Bingo. Now this car has 400-kilometer range, 130 kph top speed. In many cities, this is a full-function battery electric EV with no compromise at $12,300. I must say Chinese customers are particularly spoiled when it comes to this kind of very cheap small electric vehicles. I think this Wuling Bingo and the BYD Seagull can double their price and still sell very well in international markets. I've also managed to pick up 1 or 2 hints that this car will head towards international markets because all of the interior switches are in English, especially that light switch where it says off, on, door. If this car is solely positioned for the domestic car market, I can assure you those switches would be in Chinese. That is all from the Telescope today. If you enjoyed this video, keep watching, keep subscribing. More videos coming along very soon.